Today, we take a look at the worst wedding deaths ever recorded. From a best man who shook a champagne bottle and paid the ultimate price to a groom whose first dance suddenly made the entire wedding fall silent. It was October 15th, 2017. Rochester, New York was experiencing a mild autumn afternoon with temperatures hovering around 68 degrees. The outdoor wedding venue sat on a private estate surrounded by manicured lawns and mature oak trees, still holding their fall colors. Inside the reception hall, roughly 80 guests had gathered around white-clothed tables, arranged in a semicircle facing the head table where the newlyweds sat. Victor Glint was 38 years old and worked in delivery logistics for a regional transportation company. He had known the groom since high school and had been chosen as best man months earlier. Victor was known among friends for being easygoing and reliable, the kind of person who showed up early and stayed late to help clean up. He took his role seriously and had spent the morning coordinating with vendors and keeping the timeline on track. He had rehearsed a short speech the night before and seemed genuinely excited to celebrate his friend's marriage. The reception had been running smoothly for just over an hour. Dinner service had finished, and the DJ announced it was time for the first official toast. Victor stood and moved toward the gift table, where several bottles of champagne had been placed earlier. He selected one that had been sitting near the window for the past 90 minutes, warmed slightly by afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass. The bottle felt warm in his hands. Guests began gathering closer, many pulling out their phones to record the moment. The atmosphere was cheerful and relaxed as conversations quieted in anticipation. Victor held the bottle at chest height and made a joke about needing to wake it up first. He shook it a few times while smiling at the crowd. Several people laughed, and a few called out playfully. He began loosening the wire cage with his thumb, while the bottle remained angled toward himself, roughly 18 inches from his face. The pressure inside had increased from both the shaking and the temperature change, creating a hazardous internal buildup that Victor did not recognize. With a sudden loud pop, the cork blasted free. It shot forward in a straight line and struck Victor in his right eye with violent force. The impact snapped his head backward, and he staggered 2 steps before his hip caught the edge of the table behind him. He dropped to the floor, clutching his face as blood quickly spread across his cheek. Guests nearby saw immediate swelling and heavy bleeding around the eye. Someone screamed for help while another person called emergency services. Guests moved toward him as others cleared space for responders. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes. Victor was semi-conscious but disoriented, showing severe facial trauma and neurological distress. They transported him to a nearby hospital, where imaging later revealed the cork's impact had fractured the orbital bone and caused significant intracranial bleeding and brain swelling consistent with traumatic brain injury. His condition deteriorated despite emergency treatment, and he died later that evening from complications of severe intracranial hemorrhage. Police collected the cork, the wire cage, and the bottle from the scene. Multiple witnesses provided statements confirming the sequence of events, including the shaking and the angle at which Victor had been holding the bottle. Investigators documented witness accounts, the position of the bottle, and the sequence of events described by guests. The death was ruled accidental, with the medical examiner listing traumatic brain injury with intracranial hemorrhage following blunt orbital impact from a champagne cork as the cause. The reception ended immediately, and remaining bottles were removed from all tables as a precaution. The venue later revised its alcohol service protocols and staff training procedures. It was September 3rd, 2016. Springfield, Missouri was experiencing a warm, late summer evening with temperatures in the mid-70s. The wedding ceremony was taking place at a small community center with hardwood floors and large windows. About 60 guests filled folding chairs arranged in rows with late afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass. At the front of the ceremony space, a unity candle display had been set up on a small pedestal table. The couple had chosen a wax-pouring unity ritual instead of a traditional pillar candle. The centerpiece consisted of a clear glass bowl partially filled with melted paraffin wax, kept warm by a small electric heating plate so it would remain liquid for the ritual. 2 taper candles sat nearby. The pedestal was positioned on an uneven section of carpet where 2 pieces met, creating a slight ridge beneath one leg. Lancy Court was 26 and worked at a local healthcare facility in the pharmaceutical department. She had been friends with the bride since college and volunteered to help coordinate the ceremony. Detail-oriented and dependable, she had arrived early for setup and was assigned to stand near the unity candle to assist the couple. The ceremony had been progressing without incident for about 20 minutes. The officiant invited the couple forward for the unity candle lighting. Lancy moved beside the pedestal, holding the 2 taper candles. Guests raised phones to capture the moment as the bride approached from the left, her dress flowing behind her. As the bride moved closer, the trailing fabric of her gown brushed the table leg. The contact was light, but enough to make the unstable pedestal wobble on the uneven carpet. The glass bowl of heated wax slid toward the table's edge. Lancy stood about 2 feet away, focused on the couple. The bowl tipped over and struck the table corner as it fell. The glass shattered, sending hot liquid wax outward with fragments of glass. A large splash hit Lancy across her mouth, chin, and neck. Startled, she inhaled sharply and coughed as witnesses later reported that some hot liquid appeared to enter her mouth while the rest coated her skin. She recoiled, dropping the candles and clutching her face as witnesses heard her coughing and gasping in pain. Guests rushed forward as Lancy struggled to breathe, her voice hoarse. Redness and blistering formed around her lips and lower face. She remained conscious but in distress, breathing rapidly while attendants called emergency services and brought cool cloths. Someone unplugged the heating plate as others cleared the area. Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes and found Lancy in significant respiratory distress, with facial burns and persistent coughing, suggesting aspiration of hot liquid. Oxygen was administered, and she was transported urgently to a nearby hospital for airway evaluation and burn treatment. At the hospital, physicians confirmed facial burns and suspected inhalation injury from aspirated paraffin. Over the next several hours, doctors observed progressive airway swelling and signs of aspiration-related lung inflammation that impaired oxygen exchange despite treatment. Her condition worsened overnight as she developed severe respiratory failure consistent with aspiration-related lung injury. Despite intensive care measures, Lancy died early the following morning from complications of thermal aspiration and acute respiratory distress caused by the hot wax exposure. Investigators documented the scene and collected the broken glass bowl, heating plate, and remaining wax. Witnesses confirmed the sequence of events and the unstable placement of the pedestal. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was respiratory failure due to complications of thermal burns and aspiration of hot liquid paraffin. The death was ruled accidental. The ceremony was halted and the unity candle display was removed. It was June 3, 2015. Columbus, Ohio was experiencing a pleasant early summer evening with temperatures in the low 70s and clear skies. The wedding reception was being held at a mid-size banquet hall with polished concrete floors and exposed brick walls. About 90 guests had finished dinner and were waiting for the newlyweds to make their grand entrance onto the dance floor. The venue featured a backstage area behind a decorative metal archway. The reception coordinator had planned a dramatic reveal involving a 6-foot balloon filled with colorful confetti that would burst above the dance floor as the couple entered. A portable air compressor had been brought backstage to inflate the balloon just before the entrance cue. Daxley Finn was 31 years old and worked at a local party supply store, handling event decorations and balloon arrangements. He had been friends with both the bride and groom for several years and had volunteered to help with the special entrance effect. Experienced with balloon displays, he took pride in creating memorable celebration moments. and the coordinator asked him to handle the inflation because of his expertise. The reception had been running smoothly when the DJ announced that the couple's entrance would happen in just a few minutes. Daxley moved backstage with the balloon and began connecting it to the compressor. The balloon was thick latex, designed to hold significant pressure. He had inflated similar balloons many times and felt confident in the process. As Daxley began filling the balloon, he watched the latex expand quickly. The compressor was set slightly high to ensure the balloon would burst dramatically when triggered. He held the neck steady while monitoring the size. White stress streaks appeared across the surface, showing it was nearing maximum capacity. The coordinator called that the entrance cue was approaching. The balloon reached roughly 5.5 feet in diameter when the pressure became too great. It burst with a loud, explosive sound that startled everyone nearby. The sudden noise and shock caused Daxley to jerk backward. He lost his footing and stumbled toward the metal archway positioned directly behind him about 3 feet away. The arch was constructed of steel tubing with mounting brackets along the lower frame, one with a thin, exposed edge where a protective cap was missing. As Daxley fell, the left side of his neck struck that protruding bracket. The sharp edge caused a deep laceration to the side of his neck. Witnesses later described heavy arterial bleeding before responders arrived. He collapsed behind the archway, visible to a few people near the entrance. Witnesses saw heavy arterial bleeding and called for emergency help immediately. Someone applied firm pressure while others cleared the area. Despite the effort, the bleeding was severe and difficult to control. Over the next couple of minutes, Daxley became pale and disoriented, then lost consciousness about 2 to 3 minutes after the fall from rapid blood loss. He was unresponsive when paramedics arrived. Emergency responders reached the scene within 7 minutes. Despite immediate treatment, the vascular injury and blood loss were too extensive. Daxley was pronounced dead at the scene from traumatic neck injury with major carotid vessel damage caused by the laceration and impact. Police investigators documented the backstage area and collected the burst balloon remnants and the compressor. Witness statements confirmed the balloon rupture and fall. The death was ruled accidental, caused by traumatic neck injury after the unexpected balloon burst and impact with an exposed metal fixture. The couple's entrance was canceled, and the venue later relocated displays and required protective covers on structural brackets to reduce similar hazards. It was May 21st, 2018. Richmond, Virginia was experiencing a warm spring afternoon with temperatures in the mid-80s and high humidity. The wedding ceremony was taking place inside a large enclosed garden tent on a private estate. The white canvas structure measured about 40 by 60 feet and was mostly sealed against possible thunderstorms, with only small side flaps partially open. Inside, the air was still, warm and humid with limited ventilation. The ceremony space had been decorated with fresh floral arrangements throughout the tent. Dense clusters of white lilies, pink peonies, and eucalyptus branches lined the aisle and formed a large arch at the altar, with additional arrangements along the walls. The strong floral atmosphere filled the enclosed space. About 70 guests were seated in white folding chairs facing the altar. Meredith Spey was 36 years old and worked in administration at a local business office. She was the bride's older sister and had taken on the role of ceremony coordinator. Meredith was organized and reliable, often taking charge of family events. She also had a documented history of severe anaphylaxis, including a prior emergency hospitalization after allergen exposure. Because of this, she routinely carried an epinephrine auto-injector stored in a small clutch purse on a chair in the front row, about 30 feet from the altar. The ceremony had been proceeding smoothly for about 20 minutes. Meredith had spent the previous 40 minutes moving around the floral displays, coordinating with vendors, and checking decorations, often working near the altar arch and occasionally brushing the arrangements. The enclosed tent allowed warmth, humidity, and airborne plant particles to accumulate rather than disperse. As the bride approached the altar, Meredith stepped forward to adjust the train of the wedding dress. While standing near the floral arch, she noticed early symptoms: throat irritation, coughing, and chest tightness. At first, the reaction seemed mild, and she tried to continue assisting while taking slow breaths. Over the next several minutes, the symptoms worsened. Her coughing became more frequent, and she began wheezing audibly. Guests in the front rows noticed she appeared flushed and struggled to speak clearly. Meredith signaled toward the front row where her purse was located and started moving toward it, recognizing she needed her injector. By the time she reached the aisle, roughly 10 minutes after the first symptoms, her breathing had become labored and her voice hoarse. Family members hurried to retrieve the auto-injector and brought it to her. In the urgency of the moment, the first injector failed to discharge properly when pressed against her leg. A second injector was found in the purse, but time had already passed as her condition continued to deteriorate. Meredith collapsed to her knees and then onto her side as relatives attempted to administer the second dose and call emergency services. She was still breathing, but shallowly, with increasing airway swelling and reduced oxygen intake. Guests cleared space while someone initiated first aid and waited for paramedics. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes of the initial call and found Meredith unresponsive with severe respiratory distress consistent with advanced anaphylaxis. Paramedics administered epinephrine, oxygen, and airway support before transporting her to a nearby hospital. Despite continued treatment, she went into cardiac arrest shortly after arrival and could not be revived. The medical examiner later ruled the death accidental, attributing it to anaphylactic shock following allergen exposure inside the enclosed tent, with delayed effective epinephrine delivery listed as a contributing factor. The ceremony was halted, guests were escorted outside, and the floral arrangements were removed as the family postponed the wedding. It was May 14th, 2016. Des Moines, Iowa was experiencing a mild spring afternoon with temperatures in the upper 60s and partly cloudy skies. The wedding venue was set up on a rural property featuring a large white vinyl reception tent measuring 40 feet in diameter. The tent had been completely zipped shut to protect the decorated interior from potential weather changes. Two 20-pound CO2 cylinders had been installed inside to power the beverage dispensing system. The tent contained round tables covered in white linens, a 3-tier wedding cake, and floral arrangements. The CO2 system had been installed that morning by a catering crew. One crew member had mentioned hearing a faint hissing sound from one of the regulators, but had not investigated further. Brielle Weil was 33 years old and worked in healthcare administration at a local dental practice. She was the bride and had been involved in planning every detail of her wedding day. Brielle was known for being meticulous and hands-on, preferring to personally check arrangements rather than delegate important tasks. She had stepped away from her bridal party preparation to make a final inspection of the reception setup before the ceremony began. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes when Brielle decided to enter the sealed tent alone for her final walkthrough. She wanted to ensure that all the table settings, centerpieces, and cake display met her expectations. The tent had been closed for several hours, and the faulty regulator had been slowly releasing CO2 into the enclosed space. The colorless and odorless gas had been building inside the sealed tent without any visible indication. As Brielle moved through the tent, checking various details, she was unknowingly breathing air with increasingly dangerous levels of carbon dioxide. The gas concentration had reached levels that began affecting her cognitive function and physical coordination. Security footage from outside the tent later showed her movements becoming slower and more unsteady as she progressed through her inspection. The CO2 continued to build inside the sealed environment, creating a deadly atmosphere that Brielle could not detect. Within several minutes of entering the tent, the rising gas levels began affecting her coordination and awareness. She became disoriented, and her motor skills deteriorated rapidly. The security video showed her stumbling near the tent entrance before collapsing approximately 6 feet from the exit. One of the bridesmaids became concerned when Brielle had been inside the tent longer than expected. She unzipped the entrance and stepped inside to check on her. Within seconds, the bridesmaid felt dizzy and lightheaded from the toxic atmosphere. She immediately backed out and shouted for help, realizing something was seriously wrong. Family members rushed to the tent entrance and could see Brielle lying motionless on the ground. They attempted to enter, but were quickly overcome by the same symptoms. Someone called emergency services, while others tried to ventilate the tent. Two relatives managed to drag Brielle outside, but she was already unconscious, with blue-tinged lips and no detectable breathing. Emergency responders arrived within 11 minutes. They found Brielle unresponsive, with signs consistent with gas exposure. Despite immediate CPR and advanced life support measures, she could not be revived. The fire department confirmed dangerous levels of CO2 inside the tent. Investigators determined that a worn regulator had failed, causing a steady release of gas into the sealed tent. The medical examiner confirmed the cause of death as asphyxiation due to carbon dioxide poisoning. The death was ruled accidental. The ceremony was canceled, and the venue later implemented gas detection systems. It was July 29, 2017, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A wedding reception was underway inside a mid-size banquet hall with polished hardwood floors, where about 100 guests gathered around the dance floor for the couple's first dance. Decorative metal lantern fixtures hung roughly 11 feet above the center of the performance area. Earlier during cocktail hour, drinks had been spilled on the floor. Staff wiped up the visible liquid, but small, damp patches remained under the ambient lighting, leaving slick areas that were difficult to see. Xander Krell was 29 years old and worked as a fitness instructor at a local gym. He was the groom and had been actively involved in planning the reception entertainment. Xander was athletic and confident, known among friends for his enthusiasm. He and his bride had spent weeks choreographing their first dance, which was designed to end with a dramatic running front flip that Xander would perform as the music reached its climax. The reception had been progressing smoothly when the DJ announced it was time for the couple's first dance. Guests formed a circle around the hardwood floor, many holding up their phones to record the performance. The couple took their positions in the center as the music began. They moved through their choreographed routine flawlessly, building toward the finale. As the music approached its peak, Xander stepped back toward the edge of the circle to begin his running approach for the front flip. The guests cheered in anticipation as he prepared for the dramatic ending. He had performed this exact sequence multiple times during rehearsals and felt confident about the timing and distance required. Xander sprinted forward across the dance floor, building speed for his takeoff. As he planted his right foot to launch into the flip, his shoe made contact with one of the small, damp patches that remained from the earlier spills. The reduced traction caused his foot to slip slightly, shortening his takeoff and reducing the height of his jump. The shortened takeoff caused him to rotate lower than expected. Instead of reaching the height he had achieved in rehearsal, Xander's head struck the decorative metal lantern fixture hanging above the center of the dance floor. The impact disrupted his rotation completely, causing him to fall almost vertically toward the hardwood surface below. Xander struck the floor head first with his full body weight behind the impact. The combination of the failed flip attempt and the hard surface created a devastating collision. Guests immediately stopped cheering as they realized something had gone terribly wrong. He remained motionless on the dance floor, showing no signs of consciousness, with blood visible near his head. Several guests with medical training rushed to assist while someone called emergency services. They found Xander unresponsive, with signs of severe injury and abnormal positioning that suggested serious spinal trauma. No one attempted to move him due to the apparent severity. The music stopped and the reception hall fell silent. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They found Xander unconscious with indications of severe head and neck trauma. He was transported to a nearby trauma center where imaging revealed catastrophic injuries to both his cervical spine and brain. Despite immediate surgical intervention, he was pronounced dead several hours after arrival. Police investigators documented the scene, photographing the damp floor areas and measuring the height of the lantern fixture. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was traumatic brain injury and cervical spine fracture. The death was ruled accidental. The reception ended immediately, and the venue later implemented policies restricting acrobatic performances and requiring safety clearance of the dance floor before staged routines. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.